Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to San Jose Spotlight's post-primary election briefing. We're so glad that you could join us today for this lunch hour. I'm Ramona Guargis. I'm the co-founder of San Jose Spotlight, and I'm filling in for Jen Morrow today. Unfortunately, she was sick, but it's great to be among you all and I'm really excited to talk all things election. So as you all know, the March 5th primary election ballot was filled with so many important races up and down the ballot, with voters choosing representatives at all levels of government, from Congress to the state capitol to Santa Clara County and even San Jose City Council races. So a very consequential ballot for sure. Voters in Congressional District 16 chose from 11 candidates who are all vying to replace retiring Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. And they chose also on this ballot who will succeed in the low in Assembly District 26. I apologize for the echo. We also saw there were 2 seats up for grabs on the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, and there were a total of 5 seats on the San Jose City Council. In 2 of those seats, districts 2 and 6 were open races, and the other 3 were council members who were seeking re-election against challengers. Our political team, who you see here on the screen right now, was all over the map covering these races, from fact-checking the political ads to following the money and interviewing candidates at their election night parties. They're here today to share their insights, but most importantly, to answer questions that you might have about the races, about the outcome of the election, and what it all means leading up to the November election. So to provide a quick breakdown before we jump into the questions, I want to introduce who we're joined by today. So we're joined by our editor, Maureen Milo, and reporters Jana Kara and Lorraine Gabbard. So I wanted to first allow them to just introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about the races that they covered. And then, of course, we'll open it up to you all. Please do add your questions in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. I'll be checking them throughout the entire hour, and we'll jump to as many of those questions as we can. So let's start, Jenna, with you. And as I turn it over to you, I'm going to just put up a graphic here that shows kind of a breakdown of all the races that I just mentioned quickly. But the one you focus on election night was Congressional District 16, which was a huge contest. Everybody was talking about it, highly anticipated, nationally watched. And it's still not over, which I know you're going to talk about. So can you break down just what's the latest in the race right now? And what were some of your big takeaways in covering that race?
I mean, hello everyone, by the way, Jenna. I'm your San Jose City Hall reporter, but I did cover the CD16 race, and it was a nail biter in this last week or so. Former San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo has secured a spot in the November runoff, but right now there is just a number of votes. As of last night, 3 votes between State Assembly Member Evan Lowe and Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simidian. And so Joe Simidian was in second place for about a week after the primaries, but Evan Lowe was able to inch closer and closer and eventually overtake him because of what a lot of political analysts believe are the late absentee voters, people who vote on the day of elections or drop off their ballots on the day of elections. Those tend to be younger folks, people of color, more progressive voters who are typically going to support Evan Lowe. And so he secured a good percentage of those votes and was able to inch up. And like I mentioned, there's 3 votes between them right now. So I think we could see a recount in our future, especially with such an important race.
Yeah, that is a huge race, and we'll talk about this a little later, but those 2 candidates who are vying for second place couldn't be more different, right? Like Evan Lowe and Joe Simidian, very different candidates. We know Sam Liccardo is headed to the November election, so now it's just a matter of who's going to join him. So yeah, thank you, Jenna, for covering that. I want to now turn over to Marie Milo, our editor. Marie, you oversaw the coverage on election night from beginning to end, and you very much had your hands on all of these stories. Maybe you could give our viewers just a really quick kind of recap of high level some of the races that were on the ballot and what it all means for local, right? Looking at San Jose City Council, looking at the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors as well. And before I turn over to Marie, I just want to make sure, can everybody hear us okay? Could you hear Jenna okay? Maybe you guys can put in the chat box a yes or a thumbs up and I'll know. I see we have a hand up. I think the way to ask a question is actually through the chat box. I don't see a Q&A on my screen. So just please go ahead and add it in the chat and I'll be monitoring them there as well. So yes, Marie, please let us know a little bit about kind of the high level view of the local races. Oh, Marie, sorry, you're on mute.
All right.
There we go.
Got it. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Marie Milo. I'm one of the editors at San Jose Spotlight. And I guess this was the year of the even numbers, right? For city council. We had 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. All of them were up for re-election, whether it was somebody was terming out, like in District 2, where Sergio Jimenez termed out. And in there now we have 2 people for the November race. Joseph Lopez and Pamela Campos, they're in the runoff for this year. And then in District 4, David Cohen was just working on making sure that his incumbency stayed where it was and that he could serve 4 more years in council. And he did. He won overwhelmingly against Kansas. He's there. He's won his race and there is no November runoff whatsoever. And then in District 6, Michael Mulcahy will be facing off against Olivia Navarro because Deb Davis has termed out. So that was another open seat. Those were the 2 open seats. And then in District 8, District 8 and 10 were 2 really interesting races because both of those candidates now that are, whoops, I lost that earbud here. Both of those candidates now are running after being appointed after 2 years. So Domingo Candelas, he was appointed by the city council, and it was actually pretty contentious 2 years ago, right? So a lot of residents wanted that actually to be a special election. They wanted people to come in and have a say in that, and the city council said, no, it's just going to be too expensive. We're going to just elect these people on our own. And so that's how Domingo ended up in District 8, and now he's going to have to run off against who is he running off against? Oh yeah, he's running off against Tam Trong, and he's going to have to face him off in November. And that was because Sylvia Reynes ended up becoming a supervisor in District 1. So that's why that seat came open. And it came all of a sudden. So so them are going to end up running off in November. In terms of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, so Cindy Chavez is terming out in District 2 and Joe Siminian is terming out in District 5. And District 2 is going to be a really interesting result. No matter what happens, you've got 2 Vietnamese women who are now battling for that seat. One of them is Betty Young, who is Cindy Chavez's chief of staff. And the other one is Madison Nguyen, and she was already former city council member. So both of them are going to face off in November. And either way, it's going to be historic because we're going to have a Vietnamese American on the supervisor board for the first time. And then Joe Siminian's seat, again, because he's terming out, again, there are 2 women who are also facing off. So you have Margaret Abbey Copa, and she is going to face off against Cindy Lieber. And whoever wins there, both of them actually had Margaret's city council member in Mountain View, and Sally was a former city council member in Mountain View, and she sits now on the California State Board of Equalization. So by the end of November, we will have 4 women that are supervisors, one way or the other, on the county board. And Otto Lee will be the only man sitting on that board. So that's pretty, I think, sums it up for us, Ramona, on what's happening in those races.
Thanks for that high level view, Marie. And thanks for your patience as we fix that chat box. So yay, everybody can see it now. I so appreciate it. So just maybe one more minute, Lorraine, if you can just talk about how turnout was. I know on election day, you went to many vote centers across the county. You also covered the District 10 race that Marie just mentioned in your hometown of District 10, where Arjun Batra is defending himself against George Casey. He's the current council member. Arjun is the current council member. How was turnout? Is it what people expected? Typically primaries see a low turnout. How's it been?
So it started slowly. The Santa Clara County Voters Office expected to see between 35 and 45% of voter turnout based on previous year primaries. But it picked up, and as of last night, 37.34% of voters have turned out so far. So it has been actually a good turnout, although in the beginning it was thought perhaps it would not be so high. And the race for District 10 is an exciting one. We had Arjun Batra face off against George Casey and Lenka Wright to defend his incumbency. And it's been a bit of a nail biter there too, as Batra and Casey have been neck and neck.
Mhm. That's an interesting race because even though you mentioned he was appointed, Batra was appointed, still he has the advantage of incumbency, and to see him in second place behind George Casey, I think raises some concerns and questions. So as we start seeing some questions come in, please add them to the chat. I wanted to just toss one out to you, Jenna. You cover San Jose City Council for San Jose Spotlight, every Tuesday, and you've been in the room for years now watching these dynamics. Depending on what happens in the open races. So right now we're talking about District 6, where Mulcahy and Navarro are facing off, and then District 2, where Campos and Lopez are facing off. How would that maybe affect the dynamic of the city council majority, which right now is not in favor of Mayor Mahan? It's held by a labor or kind of a progressive wing of the council. What can this mean depending on what happens in those two open races?
Well, I think there's a really good chance that we're going to see it flip to business, and Mayor Matt Mahan is going to have more allies on the council. In District 6, I think the front runner is Mulcahy. He is a business guy, and that seat has been historically a business seat. I don't think we'll see that flip, but District 2 could flip. Joe Lopez did get the most votes. It is worth noting, though, that the three other people he was running against were all more progressive folks. More labor folks generally. So that could have split the vote. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, but it could very well go business. And shifting the majority, I think something else to note is that D8, Domingo a lot of folks thought Domingo would slide into victory in the primaries and secure majority of the vote, but Tam Trung has been able to force a runoff. And D8 does have a notable Vietnamese community. Domingo's seat is not safe. We could even see a flip there. Labor had mentioned that their intention going into this primary was to keep their stronghold on the council, keep their majority on the council. That may not happen, and I think they had switched to that kind of political tactic because there wasn't a strong enough candidate to run against Mayor Matt Mahan. So we'll see what happens, but it's definitely not 100% in favor of labor right now.
Yeah, really good point. And I think they were sort of maybe counting on District 2 a little bit, and that ended up not kind of panning out the way they thought, the labor folks thought. A lot of questions I'm seeing in the chat have to do with CD16 being so close. Those, Simidian and Low, they're apart by just a handful of ballots, and what that means in terms of a recount. I'm not quite sure on the state level what that looks like, but I can tell you that in Santa Clara County, there's an automatic recount policy, and anytime that the margin of victory is less than 1/4%, so 0.25, so 1/4%, that it triggers an automatic recount. So the county will automatically recount those ballots. Of course, voters can always request a recount, and it sounds like Jenna, the last time you talked to Evan Lowe and his team, that is the direction they're leaning, right? They're gonna probably do a recount.
So that's not confirmed. The thing that what you mentioned about the Santa Clara County rule is definitely true, but CD16 is split against 2 districts, so the automatic recount does not apply. So it is going to be a candidate or someone else who's going to have to suggest a recount. I have asked the question to both candidates, and they didn't say no. They said, let's just see where it goes, which, you know, with such an important race, with so much money and effort already funneled in, I think we can safely assume that we're going to see a recount by whoever ends up in third place. But again, there's no confirmation.
And they'd pay for it, to be clear. That would be something that the campaign would fund. It's something that they probably already anticipate. As for how long it's going to take, I know Matt Savage asked that question. I don't know that there's a right answer to that, but I know that there's a deadline in which they have to certify the vote. I think that's early April, like I want to say April 5th. I can
April
double check.
12th, I think. April
Yeah,
12th,
so
I think it is.
early
Mona.
April, they
Okay.
have to certify the vote. So by then, I think that we'll have some answers about who's in the number 2 spot, which I don't think anyone anticipated being this close, right, day by day. So as far as the cost of a recount, I think it depends on the number of ballots. It can vary. I only have sort of the knowledge of Santa Clara County because I remember covering races where those recounts had been done, and it's definitely not cheap. I would say upwards of like 30,000 is what I remember hearing, but it's something that I think depends a lot on how many are needing to be recounted and how many ballots are outstanding and how many basically the effort that it takes to do the recount and the staff time that it takes. Something we can definitely look into. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm getting all the other questions here. As far as the latest percentages, Ellen Wheeler was asking if we have kind of a breakdown of the latest percentages in some of these races. And I think we do, because we check these all the time, and every time there's an update, we've been updating our stories. I don't know if Lorraine or Jenna, either of you are prepared to kind of talk about kind of the latest numbers in your races.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So right now, and really throughout, George Casey has been in the lead. Right now, he has 38.6% of the votes, while Batra has 36.6%. So it remains close, but Casey has maintained a lead. Wright is bringing up the rear with 24.7%. And that has been the case since the start. These are updated daily, and we're keeping a tight eye on the race. But definitely Casey and Batra are headed for a runoff come November.
That's helpful to know. While we wait for more questions to come in, I wanted to ask Marie something, because you know Supervisor Joe Simitian really well personally. You've been, covering this area for many, many years. And Evan Lowe, obviously a progressive, a younger candidate, up and coming candidate, somebody who's been in office a long time in the legislature and as a council member. I wanted to basically ask you the dynamics that you're seeing, like such a different I guess spectrum of views between Joe and between Evan. What are some of the issues you're hearing in CD16 where you live, actually your district? What are some of the things that voters are considering as they've maybe supported Joe versus Evan, and that difference between the two in age and viewpoints? I guess shedding any light on what you're seeing as kind of the voters' preferences when it comes to one of these two candidates, and what would make them maybe vote in one direction versus the other.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Joe Simitian is so well known in both counties, right? In both San Mateo and Santa Clara County. And even though Evan Lowe, I remember Evan Lowe when he became a council member in Campbell. And became young in Campbell. So I think that somebody who is very right,
Are you having a little bit of trouble hearing Marie?
Oh, you're having trouble hearing?
Yeah, Marie, we're having some trouble hearing you. I think it's still a little bit rough.
Okay.
Turning off camera. That's a good suggestion, Steve.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
That's better for me. I think hopefully for others too.
No, Mona, can you hear me? Oh my God. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Marie. Let's try this again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, all right. I don't know what's going on. So what I was saying was that I think you've got a very interesting situation because you've got Joseph Midian, who's so well known in our community. He's been a very strong advocate for healthcare, for mental health, and he's a well-known name. And I think in some ways that Joe might have over anticipated his ability to capture the majority vote, at least in second place. You know, when Spotlight did the independent poll, they had Joe Simidian, I think my numbers show him at 13.3% was on the poll, and Evan was only at 7.3%. And Sam was already in first place, so you know he was ahead. But I think that they underestimated Evan, and I think that Evan garnered the young vote, the progressive vote, the LGBTQ vote, a lot of different groups, and I also think that age has become an issue in this election. You know, Joe submitted 71, Evan's a young guy. So I think there were some mixed things going on in there. And I think perhaps Joe thought with Anna Eshu's endorsement that maybe he had a better chance at even overcoming Sam. And now we're seeing a very, very tight race. It can go either way. But one thing I noticed when I was looking at the numbers is you know, between Evan, Sam, and Joe, that was about 56% of the vote. So we have a really large number of people still out there that now, if they voted for the other candidates, which clearly they did, I have to pick their guy at this point because there's no woman that's going to be running in this race. So there's going to be, you know, we had uncertainty when you originally had the poll done, Ramona, 33% were uncertain. Now we're going to have, you know, close to 42%, 44% of the vote. They're going to have to pick somebody. So who is that going to be? And I think it's going to be tough, you know, because there's going to be a recall, as Jan said. There's no question about it. And I think Joe might have been a little more confident. And I think Evan was much more aggressive in his polling out there, you know, when he went out and canvassed and everything. So, you know, now it's up to the voters to make their call.
And Evan had a lot of union support, statewide unions, as we follow the money. We saw lots of PACs supporting him. And you know, that makes a difference. That means you get your message out. I was seeing tons of ads for Evan Lowe on TV and getting those messages and all of the texting and the mailers. And Joe Simidian is, though, the only one who's represented the majority of cities in the district. I forget the number, but he's represented like all but one of the cities within CD 16. So that name recognition goes really far, as you said. Yeah, so Jason had a question. What recall is that, Maureen? I don't know if you mentioned a recall.
No, I didn't say a recall. I was talking about a recount. Yeah, a recount. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and Marie also raises a really good point that all of those people who voted for Peter Dixon or someone else that didn't make it into the top two spots are going to break in one direction or another. So in my view, if Joe Simidian doesn't make it to the November general election and it ends up being Evan Lowe and Sam Liccardo, I think all of Joe's supporters and the people who voted for him in the primary will probably break for Liccardo, right? That tends to be kind of more of the moderate perspective rather than the more progressive candidates. So there's a lot to think about as far as like if Evan doesn't make it or if Joe doesn't make it, where do his supporters or that person's supporters go? Do they go toward Sam or do they go toward the other person? So that's really interesting. So I see that there's a question here about Betty Jung, and that she ended up beating Madison Nguyen by over 1,000 votes. This is in the Santa Clara County District 2 race where we had these top two women advance to the November election. And Madison has been a former, San Jose council member and vice mayor, the first Vietnamese American on the city council. So very much kind of an embedded politician and a well-known figure in Santa Clara County. But Betty Jung, even though she was a staff member, or is a staff member, a leading staff member for Cindy Chavez, the current supervisor who she's trying to succeed, the fact that she came in maybe stronger or ahead of Madison, was that surprising to anyone on the panel, or any kind of thoughts that you want to share about why that might have happened? For me,
Okay,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, can you, okay, I actually thought that Betty would have come in first. The reason I thought that was, I think she's been more present out there. Madison's sort of not been on the political scene in the council, and Betty has been out there a lot. So I I was surprised it was as close as it was, but I think there's two camps, right? I think Betty's seen as more of a progressive, and I think Madison is more conservative in her political leanings. So it probably split the community in general. And I think it all came out down to who was ready to vote. I mean, if you see out there how important your vote is in the community, even if people say it doesn't matter. I mean, the D16 race is a perfect example of that. The congressional race is down to not even a handful of votes as to who wins. So it only means that it's even more important to vote in the primaries if you want to make sure that the person you want to win will show up in the November elections. And so I anticipated that Betty would come out front, but it was really neck and neck for a long time.
And there's
Oh,
been
I think it's also,
oh,
sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Jenna.
I was going to say it's also important to note that Labor backed Betty pretty hard. They spent a lot of money to support her. And so I think that was reflected in the ads and contact with voters. So her name may have been out there more. But it is interesting to note that there were a lot of other more progressive, labor-leaning candidates in that race, and still Betty was on top. So that must have split the progressive vote, and she still ended up on top is actually a bit surprising. And so we'll see what happens in that race. But I think because of that, we could see Betty getting even more votes and even winning this race. Because I personally, I know there was a lot of money spent there, but I thought the Labor vote would be split. And so we would see Madison on the top, but I'm a bit surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, and there has been a very deep divide in the Vietnamese community in Santa Clara County and in Silicon Valley, and very much kind of the younger generation of Vietnamese voters who might go for a more progressive candidate, and then kind of this older generation or old guard that might be a little bit more conservative or leaning Republican. And also Madison, has some history in this city with a controversy that happened many years ago over the naming of a shopping center. And even though that's a lifetime ago, I think there's still a lot of people in the Vietnamese community who harbor, some ill feelings about the way that went down. In fact, there was a recall effort against her. So I do wonder how that maybe played a part. I know there were a lot of attack ads about her move to Las Vegas, which we debunked a lot of those ads. We actually wrote a whole story about how some of those ads were just untruthful about the motives and the reasons that she left. So I think it's only going to get even more divisive leading into November, because they very much have different perspectives, and they're splitting this Vietnamese base, which, as we know, is so important, this voting bloc that is so important in local elections. And Steve, you shared more volunteers turned out to walk for Betty, while the other candidates had to pay people. That's an interesting point too. I'm sure Betty, with support from South Bay Labor Council and a lot of the kind of the labor groups, can mobilize volunteers, can mobilize people from the unions to hit the doors, and that matters, right? I know somebody put in the chat something about Matt Mahan beating Cindy Chavez in the last election in 2022, and a big part of his strategy was what he called house parties, right? He went to people's houses and he threw these parties, and he had all these voters come out and support him there. And I know that Sam Liccardo's been using that playbook a lot in his congressional race, doing these sort of like house parties as well. So please continue to throw your questions in here, folks. If you have them, I'll keep picking them. I know that somebody did bring up a question about Cindy Chavez, although that she wasn't on the ballot this time around. I know that that was a really important decision in 2022, and now Mahan was running for re-election this year. He won pretty easily. Jenna, I know he didn't really have a formidable challenger, but I wanted to just maybe put this out there, like, are you seeing movement to maybe challenge Mahan in the next cycle? Or does he feel like he's pretty untouchable right now as a mayor? Seems to be pretty popular. Is there anything you're hearing or seeing on the beat?
I haven't heard any rumblings of a challenger in 4 years, though I'm sure that is something that Labor is going to have to think about. Mahan is going to have an incredible advantage once it comes to that election. He would have been serving 6 years by then. And so far, he is very popular and well liked. And so it's going to have to be a pretty strong challenger. There were names floated about who could run against him this cycle. And so maybe we'll see some of those folks come back. No one stepped up, but maybe we see some of those folks step up in 4 years. Yeah.
It felt like the strategy of the South Bay Labor Council was very much continue to pick off the seats, right? There's 11 council seats, and in San Jose, it's not a strong mayor system, as we know. So Mayor Mahan is just one vote of 11, right? He's one vote on the council. So their strategy seemed to be more of like protect the seats we have and pick off a few more, because in doing so, they can continue to block his agenda, right? If he wants to move something forward, they have the votes to stop it or block it. And we've seen that happen even in his first few years. I wanted to also ask really quickly, while we're waiting on more questions to come in, just about incumbents. One thing that was interesting to me was that both of the council members who were appointed last year in January, Domingo Candeles in District 8, Arjun Batra in District 10, both of them faced challengers, and now both of them are going to a runoff in November. They didn't win their race outright 2 weeks ago in the primary. Was that surprising to anyone? Because usually, again, the incumbency advantage is that you've been in office, your name is on the door, you've been doing office hours, people know you and they recognize you, but it just didn't seem to be enough for Domingo, and it didn't seem to be enough for Arjun in D8 and D10 respectively. Is it just that their challengers were really, really formidable? Is it that they're vulnerable? Is it that folks are not happy with some of the policy decisions? What's happening? What's the temperature in those districts?
Well, I think their incumbency advantage is only so strong. They were appointed last January, so they haven't been in office that long, and they didn't have to campaign to get that seat. They didn't have to go door knocking. They may have not established those relationships with voters who would likely vote for them again. So while their name on the ballot can say incumbent, they may have not had enough time to build those relationships with the communities. And so I think we're seeing part of that play out. I think that these challengers, I mean, George Casey, and I think Lorraine is going to be able to talk about this far better than me, but I think he's just a strong candidate. And he's no stranger to politics. Right?
And
on
he's
the
a planning commissioner. He sits on the San Jose City Planning Commission. So, and he tried to compete for that seat when it was an appointment process, and he didn't make it. So there's some name recognition there, right? Right, Lorraine?
For sure. Also, he's worked as an attorney. He's worked in real estate. He definitely has his signs around District 10. And Batra just hasn't gotten the backing that you'd think he would have, since he beat out a number of opponents to get that appointment in January 2023. This primary election, Matt Mahan actually backed George Casey, who lost to Batra in that appointment. And then we have Lenka Wright, who not only had the labor backing, but had backing from council members Deb Davis and Omar Torres. She also had County Supervisor Ellenberg back her, and many others. So even though she came in third, she had a lot of support, which Batra didn't seem to garnish.
It was a little surprising to me to see that Batra didn't have a lot of support from his council colleagues. That often feels like a referendum on the performance of that elected official, that your own colleagues would support someone other than you. But interestingly, I didn't see Simitian get a lot of support from his colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. So maybe people are just waiting to see like what happens after the primary. And sometimes that's part of it. There's a really good question from Matt. I think this one's going to go back to you, Jenna, or Maureen, if you want to chime in on it too. Homelessness obviously is the issue of our time. It's the biggest thing that folks are worried about, crime and homelessness and blight. The mayor's proposed budget and his strategy around addressing homelessness, how much of an impact did that have or will it have on council races? Are these candidates really talking about that, and how is that sort of translating to support?
I mean, that's a great question. I think the big thing we're going to see once again in this budget cycle is the debate on how to spend Measure E dollars and the limited city dollars on homelessness and housing solutions. And so what we saw last year was that more progressive folks were in favor of preserving Measure E dollars for affordable housing development, whereas folks like Mahan wanted to shift it so that the city could fund more interim housing, temporary homeless housing, to quickly get people off of the streets. It's debate that continues to happen at the city council. The city has continued to fund or to agree to fund more interim housing. They're expanding the number of beds that they have. So the city is going to have to contend with how to fund that. And so I think as this debate plays out on the dais, allies are going to line up behind certain candidates. I think this is going to be very meaningful for candidates who are running, Domingo is gonna. There's gonna be a lot of eyes on him, how he responds to this, where he stands on this, and I'm sure that Labor has, their own opinions too, and those political pressures are going to influence how he goes throughout this process. Same with Arjun. This is going to, I'm sure, have an impact on who supports him, how he decides to spend those, or how he wants to spend those dollars. But in terms of candidates who are not sitting on the dais, I think we'll see. I'm sure they're going to speak out and voice their opinions on how they want the dollars to be spent. And yeah, we're going to see people on either side support, specific positions. Labor, I think, is more likely going to support more affordable housing, and maybe more business folks are going to align with the mayor's proposal.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that?
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that was great. Any thoughts from you, Marie or Lorraine, on that issue before we move on to the next question? The question of homelessness and how that reflects on the support that these candidates are getting or not getting.
I know it has been a huge issue in District 10. The residents have been very upset about this from the start, and they regularly bring it up at Almond Valley Community Association meetings and elsewhere. And when Batra has community town halls online, it's a very common question about what is going to be done about it. It's particularly a concern by creek beds, freeway on-ramps, and schools. And I know that the mayor has worked to create more tiny homes, and there's a variety of ways of approaching this and how much budget should go towards it. But it's definitely in the forefront of people's minds. Batra's put a lot of work into transportation, but obviously more needs to be done to battle the city's homeless crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the issues with the homeless crisis is that a lot of it is looking at it as a one-size-fits-all problem. And I don't think that's the case at all, because I don't think everybody on the street has the same needs. I think that, if you're talking about families, especially parents with children, yes, tiny homes, temporary homes, I think the council has a right read on that they need to go into a temporary solution to get to permanent housing. But so many of the people on the street are suffering from mental health issues. And those people, even if you put them in tiny homes, they're not going to stay there. So if you're not going to address the underlying problem of what these people need beyond homes, I think you're just going to be cycling through the system. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that the city is going to have, is without the supportive services behind it, which are incredibly expensive. But in the long run, it will save the city money if they can help to find a way to stabilize the population. So it's no easy answer for anybody, but I don't think ultimately that just putting people in temporary housing is a solution. We have to go deeper than that, and that's costly.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of the kind of quick fixes or band-aids is getting them off the streets because people just don't want to see it anymore, right? Like just get it out of the view of the public. But long term, the county and the city can't keep up. I think the stat is still that for every one person they house, two more become homeless. So there's just they're not able to keep up at all. And without, you're right, Marie, without investment in services and addressing those underlying issues.
I agree
Um,
with that. I also think we need a lot more affordable housing. That seems to be an ongoing issue, and it creates more homelessness because, as Marie said, there are families, a lot of families who are homeless as well. They just can't afford the increasing rent and mortgages that are here. So more needs to be done in that way as well. And I agree that one size does not fit all. So there has to be a multi-pronged approach from the city and the county.
mhm.
I think one critical part of this conversation, I know this is not about homelessness, but I think it all comes back to homelessness, I guess, in San Jose, is the city has now a state mandate to clear the waterways by June. So this is also why the city is going to have to think about these quick solutions to comply with that. Because if they don't, they face, I think it's $60,000 worth of daily fines per pollutant. So it is going to ramp up really quickly. It's going to be incredibly expensive. So this is something the city has to deal with. And to do it by June, that's you can't build affordable housing that quickly. So there's a lot of moving factors here. It is not easy.
And the costs keep ballooning, right? All these like quick
Mhm.
builds, even that cost is ballooning. And we've written about issues with those homes, like mold and other sort of challenges that they're facing. One race we haven't really talked about, and I saw it came up in the chat box, is Assembly District 26, which we mentioned it earlier, was Evan Lowe's seat, and the top two vote getters there are Patrick Aarons, who actually works for Lowe, is a staff member in Lowe's office, as well as Tara Srinivasan. And between the two of them, I don't know if any of our panelists here have any insights on that race or what some of the dynamics are that you're seeing. I know there were other contenders who were strong, like Omar Din, but ultimately these are the two that we're going to see go into the November election.
Well, I think, in 8026, Tara was in third place for a period of time, and there was a Republican who was ahead of her. So it's, as of right now, Aarons is definitely the more popular candidate, the stronger candidate. He's also got a lot of labor support. It's not only labor. I mean, he's got special interests supporting him too, PG&E and Uber. And, it sounds like Aarons has been preparing for this for some time. He's had his eye on the seat. He's been in the political sphere, but Tara is no stranger either. She worked for Dave Cortese, and sits on the Board of Education, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, but Aaron seems to have a lot of the backing. He's really secured, a lot of support. And I remember hearing when Tara announced her candidacy that it was a surprise for many people. So, we'll see how that plays out. I think, and Rod just asked this question, when we look at this race, it's evident that money is not everything. I mean, Omar Dean was able to raise a significant amount of money, and I think it's because he is a Muslim candidate and was able to really tap into that community. And they really wanted to see that representation. But it may not have translated, right? I don't think the majority of the district is Muslim. So he was able to really tap in there fundraising wise. It was also interesting to note in that race, the Sunnyvale Democratic Club didn't support Omar. They supported, I think, Aarons. From what I heard, behind the scenes, is that Aarons has been preparing for the seat for a while. So he has already secured these votes. Omar is also a relatively new person in the political scene. He, I think, was elected in 2020, I think. Yeah, he was, because he's up for re-election now in Sunnyvale. He's a Sunnyvale City Council member. So he just maybe just doesn't have the same connections there.
Yeah, and to your point, Rod, the fundraising doesn't always translate. We saw, like you said, a lot of money coming in for Omar, but it just in the end wasn't enough. Any observations, I think, from Marie or Lorraine on this one, on the 80-26 race?
I would say regarding money, it was interesting because Batra did raise the most money of the D10 candidates. He raised above $67,000. He was followed by Casey, who raised about 59,000, and then Wright about 32,000 as of December. So it's kind of interesting where it isn't always the money in the end. Sometimes it's how voters respond to someone's personality, perhaps, or how much that person is out in the district and visible signage wise, or having house parties, as you were mentioning. So it's interesting. It's not always incumbency. It's not always money. Sometimes it's just the intangibles.
Mm-hmm. And
And
endorsement.
Steve,
Oh,
sorry. I just wanted to correct something for the record. Thank you, Steve, for pointing out that it was a dual endorsement with Patrick and Tara. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. We appreciate it. And yeah, definitely money's a piece of it. I think endorsements can be a piece of it. One thing that was interesting, going back to Congressional District 16, everybody was sort of waiting to see where Anna Eshoo, the current Congress member, would throw her support. And it ended up going to Joe Simitian. But meanwhile, Evan Lowe got support from Congressmember Ro Khanna. So you saw a split with our congressional delegation where, the incumbent in that seat herself went for one candidate, but the others went for another. And I think that sometimes that makes a difference, right? But for the most part, a lot of people in that district are very loyal to the Congresswoman and will kind of follow her lead. If she says, this is the person, or this is the person I think should succeed me, I think that has certainly made a difference. So did we see endorsements play an important role in some of these other races? Were there any big takeaways about how that did or did not maybe have the impact that folks think it should?
I mean, I think Sam Liccardo didn't have as many shiny endorsements, for example. I know he got the Mercury News, he got the SF Chronicle, those are important, but he didn't get like an Anna Eshoo or Ro Khanna, type of endorsement. He still was first, and he secured most of the votes. So I think endorsements matter to a certain extent. It helps people get to know a candidate better, but it's not everything. At least that's how I saw it. And when we go back and look at Cindy Chavez's race against Mayor Matt Mahan, I mean, she also had a long, elaborate list of endorsements. And it just seems that it just doesn't matter to voters as much anymore.
Yeah, we have another question here about commenting on the county and San Jose elections and how they would have turned out if one or the other jurisdiction used ranked choice voting. I know that ranked choice voting was an issue that has come up in San Jose. I think it was one of the early recommendations of a committee that was looking at making some changes to the city charter. Ultimately, it didn't move forward. And it's come up, I think, in other areas as well, in other communications. But any thoughts that you all have about what that impact could have been like, and which candidates would have appealed to the supporters of which other candidates? That's a tough one. I know oh, go ahead, Marie. Did you?
No, I just going to say that I think that would have been a bit of a guessing game. I don't really know, because it's always an elimination process, and especially if the races are tight. And we've had so much controversy over the whole concept of ranked choice voting. So I don't know if we could predict anything really there.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. And I think what Jenna brought up earlier about the consolidation of votes after the primary is I think really what my mind goes to, which is, if they couldn't have, let's say, Sam Liccardo, maybe they would have gone for Joe Simitian. And in this case now with the top two system, those folks who voted for one person in the primary are gonna end up voting. It's almost like ranked choicing in that they're gonna go to the next candidate that they didn't support in the primary, but that closely aligns with their viewpoints and with their political leanings. So it's sort of like your second choice. Only the difference is you're doing it after March, when you eliminated your first choice, right? The first candidate you wanted to choose. I know this isn't election related directly, but something that has come up in the chat I see is the strong mayor issue. I know I brought it up earlier by saying that Mahan is just one vote of 11 on the council. And I know that there was, I think even one of our attendees, Dr. Terry Christensen. Hi, Terry. I know he worked on this issue, and others in the past in San Jose have explored it. It hasn't moved forward for one reason or another. Has that, Jenna, come up at all on the beat, bringing that back, discussing the idea of San Jose becoming a strong mayor system as opposed to what it is today, which is really run by the city manager? Are you seeing anything about it?
No, I haven't seen anything about it. Nothing come to the dais. I do remember when Sam Liccardo was mayor that there was some discussion about it, but I don't want to misspeak. So let me just look that up again. But I remember there was some discussion around that then, that he may have introduced a proposal around it. And he got a lot of backlash against it. Since then, it has not come up at all.
I remember there was,
and I mean, I think if,
yeah, I was gonna say,
I was just gonna one sentence.
Yeah, no worries. I remember there was a lot of frustration around, like, you know, the time of civil unrest and, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of concerns around, you know, police violence and police brutality. And I remember at that time, Sam saying something to the effect of, like, you know, him being unable to hold accountable the department heads, such as the police chief and others, right? So like, people look to the mayor to essentially hold them accountable, but the mayor really isn't managing these department heads or these positions. It's really the city manager. So so from that standpoint, it was like not knowing who to hold accountable when things like this happen. And I think that's why Sam wanted to expand those powers and be able to have a little bit more, you know, more of a grasp on how to address those issues. Yeah, so I know, yeah, I think that debate is going to maybe continue, but it's not one that has really come up at this point. I know Rod has a question here about the experience of canvassing, especially post-pandemic. This is an interesting question. How hard it is to get people to meet with you and open the doors when you knock on them. Did any candidates talk about this and how they got their message out beyond the obvious methods, which are mailers? It seems like Mahan and Liccardo put a great emphasis on meet and greets, like I mentioned earlier, those house parties as they call them. Did you see any new strategies post-COVID, or any kind of different ways that folks are, you know, candidates were trying to reach voters this cycle?
It didn't seem to actually be a problem for the candidates. They did continue to knock on doors and took great pride in how many doors they knocked on, and people were willing to speak with them. So I think perhaps people are feeling a little safer now and willing to open their doors to candidates.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that a lot of political analysts after the 2022 election, and I know we're going back a little bit, but the mayoral election, is Matt Mahan had put a lot of effort in his field strategy. So he was knocking on a ton of doors. I think it worked well in his favor. And any candidate I've talked to has said their number one priority. And, you know, even when I've called them, they're like, oh, I'm actually walking around this neighborhood. So I think that's still the number one strategy for candidates, at least from what I've heard. And I was going to say something else, but it slipped my mind, so I'll end it there.
Yeah, it works, right? Because people get to meet you in real life, and those candidates that are more, you know, accessible or more willing to sit down for an hour and just answer questions. I remember when we covered the mayor's race 2 years ago, Jenna, you might remember this too. Oftentimes we saw Mayor Mahan stay at an event, you know, a simple candidate forum or some sort of event for an hour or more after it's over. Everyone else has left. Every other candidate's gone home. They're already making dinner. And, you know, Mahan would still be there talking and answering questions. And he'd stay till the very end, regardless of how many people needed to talk to him or wanted to ask him a question. So that makes a difference. I think the accessibility and he came in as sort of this fresh voice, this fresh perspective, who's going to change things up and really challenge the status quo. And the fact that he'd humble himself and stay for an hour or more to answer all of those questions, that personal touch, like Lorraine said, I think really does make a difference. How personable are these candidates when they come to your door? How much do you believe them when they say they're going to fix your problem or fix the pothole down the street, right? Like these are the things that local voters care about. I know we're coming up on time with just a few more minutes left. I thought since we don't have any more questions in the chat box, it might be fun to maybe do a quick round of like predictions. Who do you think is going to win? I remember we always had to do this on your show, Terry. We would talk about, well, who's going to win? And I remember being very wrong a lot of the time because you just don't know. You just don't know what voters are going to do. You only have so many clues. But maybe we start with Maureen. I'm going to put her on the spot. If you have any kind of predictions on any of the races, or if you want to just share what you think is going to happen in November, and I'll do mine too. I promise.
Okay, I think you can turn my screen back on too. I think
Yes.
I got this sound thing working. Okay, so
Let's do
I
it.
think you're good with that. I think that I feel, I don't like to really predict stuff, but I do believe that Michael Mulcahy is going to win in District 6. I think he has a very strong rapport with that community as whole, in terms of it's not just Willow Glen, there's other sections there, but I know that he played a big part in really revitalizing Willow Glen's downtown Lincoln Avenue, and people know him quite well. So in terms of that particular race, I feel that, I think he's going to win. I also think that just from what we've been seeing, and actually Jen and I were talking about this before we came on air here, is that it looks like there'll be more business candidates in the end, more business representation than we saw in the past with labor. So I think that's going to be kind of interesting. And I can't say that's going to happen, but just from an overall prediction standpoint. And in terms of District 16, I mean, a congressional District 16, I know who I would like to win, but I have a suspicion that Sam Liccardo is going to win. I just think he's out ahead right now, and I could be wrong, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, those are good ones. Jen or Lorraine, sorry to put you on the spot.
I could go quickly. I think Sam Liccardo will, I don't know who's going to advance with him to the runoff, but I think Sam Liccardo will win the seat. I think Betty will win. I think Pamela Campos will win D2, but we'll see. I mean, Joe Lopez did well. I think Domingo will win D8. I think Patrick will win D26. I think Margaret will win District 5 in the county. I think Michael Mulcahy will win District 6. And I think George Casey will win District 10. But we'll see.
That's an interesting one. Okay.
We'll see.
I think
Don't hold me to it.
I think I have to agree, actually.
Yeah. We should.
And it doesn't represent any necessary bias. I mean, this is just what I think is going to happen.
Yes.
I did guess who was going to make it to the runoffs, and I was right on almost every race race.
Jana's record is really good. I have to
Yeah.
say, Jana's record is really good. So
And I think that at the D10, people are really enjoying Casey's energy and his vision.
Mhm.
He seems very, very strong, and I think he does have legs.
yeah. Lorraine's like, I am not commenting on the others. That is it. Yeah, mine.
Ramona, what are your guesses?
Oh God. So I've been wrong a lot too, but I agree with Marie and with Jenna that I do believe Sam Liccardo wins Congressional District 16. I think all the cards are lined up for him. I think Patrick is taking AD 26 as well. Been preparing for it a long time, as you mentioned, and lots of support there. Although Tara is an amazing candidate, and I know her personally and wish her well. From the perspective of the council races, I think Domingo wins re-election, but I don't know. D10 is really a toss-up for me. I know Arjun Batra has been somewhat vulnerable here, and Casey has a lot of support, but it's a tough one. I don't know that one. Michael Mulcahy, District 6 is my prediction, and Margaret Abe Koga in Santa Clara County District 5. I don't know about D2 and San Jose, or D2 in Santa Clara County, because I know both Madison and Betty are quite strong candidates. So I'm really stuck on those two, but definitely Liccardo and Mulcahy, I think, and Patrick Aarons are the three that I feel strongly or strongest about. And to the point Jenna made, not biased. We're not saying we support these candidates or we hope they win. We're just simply saying, based on what we've been covering, based on what we're seeing and hearing from the public, that this is what we think might happen. So I think that is all the time we have for today. This was great. I had a lot of fun. I want to thank everybody for joining us, for spending your lunch hour with us. I also wanted to ask you to please stay in touch with us. Here is the team. Hopefully everybody can see this. Okay, yeah, okay. Here's the team that you were hearing from today, and please stay in touch with us. Let us know if you have ideas for stories that we should be covering. Let us know if there is something going on in your community or you have a question for the candidate. We would love, we'd very much love to cover those stories. And please join us in the November briefing event as well. So after the November election, we'll do this again and we'll talk about all of our predictions there. And finally, if you enjoy programming like this, please consider supporting San Jose Spotlight. We're a nonprofit and we're powered by your support. So every donation helps and helps us continue to do this amazing work and keep these amazing reporters and editors on our team. So thank you all so much. We look forward to continuing to cover the election into November. Please continue to follow our work, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Take care.